Building strong relationships in the community is a key component of the head of school's work. But what about your role as a trustee? What are the expectations of the board and individual trustees to develop and maintain effective relationships with the various stakeholder groups? In this video, we explore what facets you need to be aware of and how you can nurture these various relationships. As you'll have already heard, one aspect that is commonly misunderstood, particularly among elected trustees, is the perception that they should be advocating for a particular section of the school community, which they feel they represent or which may have propelled them onto the board. While your views may be reflective of that particular segment of the school, your job isn't to formally represent them, but rather you serve to forward the mission and values of the school and to ensure its long-term success. However, since you have a strong connection to a segment of the community, you'll want to strengthen that relationship so that you may foster positivity and support for the school. But that shouldn't be seen as any kind of trade for your support of individual or lobby groups. As a trustee, you should be visible supporting the school's guiding statements in the community and agreeing as a board how best to communicate with the stakeholders to garner their ongoing support. Whether you'd consciously thought about it before, you're in a position of leadership within the school community, since you have responsibilities that include creating and adapting the school's mission, policies, and priorities. As a result, what you say in the community and the ways in which they're said are telegraphing messages to the various stakeholders, whether you like it or not. Even saying nothing says something. And so as leaders of the school, in the school community, if you're not publicly supporting the policies and priorities of the mission, what does that say about the school and how you feel about it? Therefore, you should be enthusiastic in your endorsement of the school, including its leadership and the programs, even though you may be still working to improve systems through your work on the board. If you feel that compromises your integrity somehow, then perhaps you should reconsider whether you continue to serve on the board. As a trustee, you have a duty to ensure that the leadership and staff adhere to a code of conduct of appropriate behaviour for international schools. Unethical behaviour in the school undermines the moral high ground of the staff and can do untold damage in the community. And so while it is your responsibility to ensure that ethical practices are embodied within the organisation, that also means modelling best practice at the board level. You're not expected to automatically become an educational expert, nor know the details of every issue or decision that the board has taken. However, you're the guardian at the gate, so to speak, to ensure that the deliberations and the decisions taken by the board are done so in all seriousness, with integrity and with an eye to fairness, equity and justice. While individual decisions may seem innocuous by themselves, a useful litmus test would be to ask yourself, how would you feel if you had to defend your decision in a court of appeal? If you're challenged by a parent or a teacher or a lobby group, how will your argument hold up? There are often times when boards have to make difficult decisions, and sometimes unpopular choices. And how the board demonstrates integrity and thoughtfulness will determine how these are embraced in the community. The board builds trust and understanding in the community through its ongoing efforts to act with integrity and transparency and to communicate effectively. As mentioned previously, transparency is a delicate balance between communicating decisions and plans well while retaining confidentiality of the deliberations and any private matters. Of course, remember that unless specifically empowered by the board to engage in discussions with a particular group or meeting, individual trustees save their voice for the board meetings and do not have any authority to present the board view. Some boards have developed communication strategies that identify the various stakeholder groups and interested parties and has agreed procedures for managing communications. Aside from the parent groups and communication from the board, there are usually governmental bodies that need to be considered and strategies developed. So, for example, many international schools face challenges when dealing with host country bureaucracy, whether related to taxes, licensing, or employment permits. And having a network spreading from the board is crucially important. There may be other key organizations to be considered whether prominent embassies or NGOs or major employers in the community. While the head of school will be dealing with the day-to-day running of the school, preparing the required documentation and communication, the influence that the trustees can have in setting up introductory meetings or fostering good relationships is enormous. As always, since there's potential to blur the lines between what's the head's role and the work of the board, open discussions and explicit clarification of these roles is necessary. Board time spent on agreeing communication strategies is time well spent, and there are usually complex factors that often emerge only through dialogue. So, for example, international schools are usually a melting pot of different nationalities, languages and cultures. What may seem appropriate for some do not necessarily work for others. Where some information may be made available through the website, others may need to be emailed or discussed through meetings. There may be standard procedures that you identify, such as publishing the agenda and minutes of the board meetings each month. However, there'll be other issues or decisions that are far more delicate and need to be carefully disseminated to ensure the correct message is being put across. Something that I keep in my head is, it's not what I thought I said that's important, it's what you thought you heard. It's not just when formulating strategy, but each time you're faced with an issue or decision, play devil's advocate and ask yourself how best the information needs to be shared and if it needs to be shared at all. How much information can you share without breaching confidentiality? Are you sharing a decision that's already made, or are you actually seeking input and ideas to inform future decisions? Some of the most challenging communication conundrums are those that you hadn't planned for. So, for example, if there was an accident or a suicide in the community, or if there was a rumour that a teacher had acted inappropriately, what if you had a phone call from the press asking about these reports? What would your response be? These are times when you did not have the luxury of time to discuss at great length and strategize, but where thoughtful pre-planning can help. You can effectively create an emergency pack, a scenario pack, so that you do spend the time, when not in crisis mode, to think through various scenarios and responses and come up with strategies that you can refer to for guidance when these situations arise. So while you may need time to investigate and gather data, there needs to be a plan to reassure parents. Much of this burden naturally falls to the head of school, but that's not to say that trustees won't get caught up somehow, and you'll want to take appropriate steps to get ahead of the situation or diffuse a brewing conflict in the community. Knowing how to deal with the car park chatter and the community gossip is a perpetual challenge for both the leadership and the trustees. On the one hand, you don't want to be jumping to attend to every issue that's been brought up as a concern from the car park chatter, but that doesn't mean you can ignore it entirely. The board's job, of course, is to focus on the long-term success of the school, but that has to be constantly refocused by looking through the lens of the current situation. Trustees will need to be attentive to the ebb and flow of comments and concerns, and to be alert to any significant pressure groups that may be creating disharmony or conflict in the community. But it's a delicate balancing act to get right. And so there's a valid reason for caution to try to better understand if the issue is being vocalized just by a minority in the community, or if it's generally reflective of the majority of parents who have thus far been silent on the matter, which really begs the question, how do you know? However, there's often a greater danger to ignoring or dismissing legitimate concerns, as they tend to keep simmering and coming to the surface stronger and stronger each time. Of course, this depends on the style of governance and the understanding parents and teachers may have about the role that governors play in the school, but most international schools see their community groups as important stakeholders that are critical to the ongoing success of the school. What you're trying to do is to ensure that there's a process for reviewing grievances so that they're given the attention they deserve. If people feel that they have not got the result that they're looking for from the school's leadership, this is when they typically start to make waves in the community and it becomes a board issue. If the process for leadership and board to review grievances is dismissive, then there's a danger that the issue gains traction in the community, not necessarily because of the issue itself, but now it becomes a concern about the school and board and how they deal with issues fairly or unfairly if they're consistent or transparent. This is now a very different focus, and you can end up with a community that's very splintered, raising issues and concerns that touch on the integrity of trustees and the board and the lack of trust that follows as a consequence. Obviously, it's better to try to get ahead of this situation wherever possible so that it doesn't deteriorate into such a scenario where the trust is broken. But again, it's not just immediately jumping at every crying baby out there at the expense of your strategic focus and goals. Maybe convening a meeting with a special interest group can ensure that legitimate concerns are being heard. And this has a tendency to persuade those rational bystanders that the board is acting with integrity and due diligence. It also provides an opportunity for trustees to discuss the issues across the spectrum of the community and devise appropriate communication strategies with a goal to ensuring relevant and timely information being shared. How are your communication and relationship building strategies discussed at your board level? What might you want to explore further and discuss with your fellow trustees?